A developer need to create an AWS CloudFormation template which should automatically identifies the AWS region where it is deployed. What is the most operationally efficient method to determine the deployment region? Correct answer, utilize the built-in AWS region pseudo parameter. Explanation: the AWS region pseudo parameter is a built-in variable that automatically resolves to the region where the stack is created. This is the most efficient approach because it requires no manual configuration or external API calls to function. Why others are incorrect: parsing the stack ID is an unnecessarily complex and manual workaround for data that is already directly available. Dynamically reference the region from a value in the AWS Systems Manager parameter store, introduces external dependencies and requires you to manually manage and update parameters across every region. Standard parameters require manual user input, which increases the risk of human error and prevents full automation. A gaming platform allows users to trade in-game items with each other. Both users' records must be updated atomically in a single transaction, and all changes must be rolled back if any update fails. Which AWS solution provides this transactional capability? Correct answer, Amazon Aurora MySQL using operations within a transaction block. Explanation: Amazon Aurora MySQL supports traditional relational database transactions, allowing multiple updates to be committed or rolled back as a single atomic unit. This ensures that if one user record fails to update, neither record is changed, maintaining data integrity. Why others are incorrect: Amazon DynamoDB with the consistent reads only ensure the most up-to-date data is read, they do not facilitate multi-record ACID transactions. Amazon Elasticsearch for MEMC8 is an in-memory store and does not support the ACID-compliant transaction blocks required here. Amazon Athena is a query service for data in S3 and is not designed for managing transactional record updates for a gaming platform. A developer receives a code storage limit exceeded error during the execution of an AWS Lambda function. What is the best course of action to resolve this? Correct answer, decrease the size of your code storage. Explanation: this error indicates that the total code storage across all Lambda functions and versions in the account has hit its limit. Reducing the size of code storage typically by deleting unused function versions or old functions frees up the necessary space. Why others are incorrect: increasing the package size would consume more storage and worsen the existing error. Environment variables have their own separate size limits and do not impact the overall code storage quota. While the source suggests reducing current storage as the best action, code storage limits are fixed per account and cannot be bypassed by simply changing settings. A developer is using Amazon SQS and has observed a rise in message volume. Which action can the developer take to increase the rate at which new messages are processed? Correct answer, set queue attributes and receive message. Explanation: receive message is necessary to retrieve the messages for processing, while set queue attributes can be used to optimize settings like the visibility timeout. Combining these allows the developer to scale the consumption and management of a high volume of messages effectively. Why others are incorrect: purge queue, this action deletes all messages currently in the queue, which results in data loss rather than faster processing. Send message batch, this is used by producers to send messages in groups, it does not help the consumer process incoming messages faster. A developer creates a customer-managed AWS KMS key that is used by multiple AWS users to encrypt data stored in Amazon SC. The developer configures Amazon SNS to send a notification when the key is scheduled for deletion. The developer must retain any SNS messages that fail delivery so they can be reprocessed later. Which AWS service or feature should be used to meet this requirement? Correct answer: utilize Amazon Simple Queue Service, SQS, as a dead letter queue. Explanation: Amazon SQS can be configured to act as a durable storage for undelivered SNS messages. This allows developers to preserve message integrity and reprocess them once the delivery issue is resolved. Why others are incorrect: AWS Lambda can process messages, it does not provide the native, durable storage required to hold undelivered messages for later reprocessing. CloudWatch alarms are effective for monitoring and alerting on failure metrics, but they cannot store or preserve the actual message content. SES is a service designed for sending emails and lacks the queuing and persistence features necessary for message reprocessing. A developer is developing a serverless application that requires periodic execution of an AWS Lambda function at 10-minute intervals. Which automated, serverless mechanism can accomplish this? Correct answer: create an Amazon Event Bridge rule that runs on a regular schedule. Explanation: Amazon Event Bridge, formerly CloudWatch Events, provides a native, serverless scheduling feature that can trigger AWS services at specific intervals. This is the standard automated way to invoke Lambda functions on a schedule without managing any infrastructure. Why others are incorrect: environment variables are used for passing configuration settings to the function code and cannot be used to trigger execution schedules. SNS does not possess a built-in timer or delay delivery feature that can be used to schedule periodic function invocations. Using an EC2 instance introduces manual server management, which violates the requirement for a serverless solution. An application needs to consume Amazon SQS messages that range in size from 1 KB up to 1 GB. What is the recommended way to manage these messages? Correct answer: use Amazon S3 in conjunction with the SQS extended client library for Java. Explanation: standard SQS messages are limited to 256 KB. The SQS extended client library automatically offloads large payloads, up to 2 GB, to Amazon S3 and sends a pointer to that data within the SQS message. Why others are incorrect: SQS does not have a native integration with EFS for managing large message payloads. EBS is block storage for EC2 and is not designed to work as a distributed message payload store for SQS. S3 can be used, but the standard CLI does not automate the logic of offloading and retrieving payloads like the extended client library does. A developer is implementing a scheduled AWS Lambda function that must authenticate with a third-party system using an API key. The developer must ensure the API key is protected with encryption at rest. Which AWS solution satisfies these requirements? Correct answer: store the key as a Lambda environment variable using an AWS KMS customer managed key. Explanation: using an AWS KMS customer managed key to encrypt environment variables ensures that sensitive data, like API keys, is never stored in plain text at rest within the Lambda configuration. Why others are incorrect: scheduled functions are automated, there is no user present to provide a password during execution. Hard coding keys in the source code is a major security risk as the keys are visible to anyone with code access and are not encrypted at rest. Lambda at edge and HTTPS address encryption in transit, but they do not provide a mechanism for encrypting stored secrets at rest. A software company stores user-generated documents in Amazon S3 and must ensure encryption at rest. To comply with industry regulations, the company requires control over its encryption keys but does not want to manage encryption infrastructure itself. Which encryption strategy should be implemented? Correct answer, server-side encryption with AWS KMS managed keys, SSEKMS. Explanation: SSEKMS allows AWS to manage the underlying encryption infrastructure while giving the developer control over key policies, rotations, and audit logs. This satisfies both the need for managed infrastructure and the requirement for key control. Why others are incorrect: client-side encryption requires the company to manage the encryption infrastructure in-house, which the company explicitly wants to avoid. SSE S3 uses keys entirely managed by S3, meaning the company does not have the required extra protection of controlling the keys. SSEC requires the developer to manage and provide the actual keys for every request, significantly increasing the management burden. A developer is designing an application that enables users to upload documents to Amazon S3. To ensure complete data confidentiality and prevent third-party access to the document contents, which encryption approach should be implemented? Correct answer, SSE S3, server-side encryption with S3 managed keys. Explanation: according to the provided sources, SSE S3 is the identified encryption type that meets the requirement of ensuring document contents are not accessible to any third party in this specific scenario. Why others are incorrect: while SSEKMS provides robust security and key control, the source specifies SSE S3 as the correct answer for this particular question. Dual-layer encryption is a highly specialized security feature and is not identified as the primary solution for this general requirement. Client-side encryption with local keys is highly secure, but the source points to the server-side SSE S3 as the intended answer. An existing architecture relies on numerous AWS Lambda functions coordinated through a large, custom-built state machine that is prone to failure. Which AWS service should be used to refactor and manage the state transitions? Correct answer, AWS Step Functions. Explanation: AWS Step Functions is specifically designed to coordinate multiple AWS services into serverless workflows. It replaces custom legacy coordination code with a visual state machine that manages retries and error handling automatically. Why others are incorrect: AWS Data Pipeline Service is intended for data-driven workflows and moving data between AWS services, not orchestrating application logic. AWS SNS with AWS SQS can link functions, they do not provide built-in state management or complex branching logic for a state machine. Amazon Elastic MapReduce is a big data platform for processing vast amounts of data using frameworks like Spark, which is irrelevant to Lambda orchestration. A company is implementing a REST service using Amazon API Gateway with Lambda integration. The service must support versioning to allow separate testing environments. What is the most effective method to achieve this? Correct answer: deploy versions as unique stages with unique endpoints and use stage variables. Explanation: Using stages allows for environment isolation, example prod versus test, while stage variables can dynamically point the API gateway to different Lambda aliases or versions without changing the API configuration. Why others are incorrect. X version header requires custom routing logic inside your application code, increasing complexity compared to native API gateway features. Authorizers are intended for security and access control, not for directing traffic between different deployment versions. Resource policies control access permissions for the API but do not provide a mechanism for versioning or stage management. A company operates a Lambda-based application that consumes messages from an Amazon SQS queue named High Priority Queue. The Lambda function is being updated to also consume from a low priority queue. The function must always process a maximum of 10 messages concurrently from the high priority queue before processing messages from the low priority queue, with a hard limit of 100 concurrent invocations. Which solution meets these requirements? Correct answer: set the event source mapping maximum concurrency to 10 for high and 90 for low priority. Explanation: by setting maximum concurrency on the event source mapping, you directly control how many simultaneous Lambda instances are allocated to each queue, ensuring the total remains at 100 while partitioning the load. Why others are incorrect. Delivery delays only postpone when a message becomes visible, they do not control the number of simultaneous Lambda invocations. Batch windows determine how long to wait before processing a batch, which does not manage simultaneous invocation limits. Batch size controls how many messages are in a single invocation but does not restrict the number of concurrent invocations occurring at once. A developer has created an AWS Lambda function that should be triggered whenever items in an Amazon DynamoDB table are updated. The Lambda function exists, and the execution role has the required permissions. DynamoDB streams are enabled for the table, but the function is still not triggered. What must be done to enable updates to the DynamoDB table to invoke the Lambda function? Correct answer: configure event source mapping for the Lambda function. Explanation: an event source mapping is the required configuration that tells Lambda to poll the DynamoDB stream and invoke the function when it detects changes. Why others are incorrect. While a short timeout might cause a function to fail, it would not prevent the initial trigger from occurring. DynamoDB streams integrate directly with Lambda. SNS is an unnecessary extra layer for the standard trigger. Parameter controls what data is sent to the stream, but the stream must still be mapped to the function to trigger it. A developer is deploying an application on an Amazon ECS cluster using AWS Fargate. The application runs in a Docker container based on an Ubuntu image. The developer needs to store application data that can be shared across multiple ECS tasks and remain available after a container is terminated. Which solution meets these requirements? Correct answer: use Amazon EFS and configure the mount points and EFS volume configuration in the task definition. Explanation: Amazon EFS provides a shared, persistent file system that can be mounted by multiple Fargate tasks simultaneously, ensuring data is preserved after task termination. Why others are incorrect. EBS volumes are typically restricted to a single instance at a time and do not easily support sharing across multiple Fargate tasks. The application uses an Ubuntu, Linux, image. FSX for Windows is incompatible with this operating system. Standard Docker volumes are often ephemeral or local to a single host, making them unsuitable for multitask persistence in Fargate. A developer is investigating an issue in a company's application. Messages are sent to an Amazon SQS queue, and an AWS Lambda function polls the queue to send emails via Amazon SES. During periods of high traffic, users are receiving duplicate emails. What are two possible reasons for these duplicate messages? Correct answer, the SQSQ's visibility timeout is lower than or equal to the Lambda timeout. And standard SQSQs support at least once message delivery. Explanation, standard SQSQs guarantee at least once delivery, which naturally allows for duplicates. Furthermore, if the visibility timeout expires before Lambda finishes, the message becomes visible again and is reprocessed, causing a second email. Why others are incorrect, standard queues do not support exactly once processing, only FIFO queues offer that guarantee. Bounce rates affect whether emails reach their destination, not whether the application sends them twice. DKIM is a security setting for verifying the sender and has no impact on message delivery duplication. A deployment package uses the AWS CLI to copy files to any Amazon S3 bucket in an AWS account by using access keys stored in environment variables. The package runs on Amazon EC2 instances that have been updated to use an assumed IAM role with a restrictive policy that permits access to only one S3 bucket. After this change, the developer can still log into the instance and write to all S3 buckets in the account. What is the most likely cause of this behavior? Correct answer, an IAM managed policy is being used on the IAM role. Explanation, according to the source, the most likely cause for the instance still having broad access despite a restrictive intent is the presence of an IAM managed policy on the role that provides more access than the developer realized. Why others are incorrect, software corruption would not grant unauthorized permissions, it would likely cause the CLI to fail entirely. While inline policies grant permissions, the source specifically identifies the managed policy as the cause in this scenario. Although environment variables take precedence over roles in real-world scenarios, the source identifies the managed policy as the intended answer. How can a developer use Amazon API Gateway to expose a legacy XML-based SOAP service to external clients who prefer JSON? Correct answer, create a RESTful API and transform JSON to XML using mapping templates. Explanation, API Gateway mapping templates allow you to define how data is transformed. You can accept a JSON payload from a client and convert it into the XML format required by the legacy SOAP service. Why others are incorrect, a load balancer routes traffic but cannot transform a JSON payload into the XML structure required by a SOAP service. Resource policies manage access and permissions, they have no role in data transformation or mapping. Pass incoming XML to the SOAP interface requires the client to send XML, failing the requirement to expose the service to JSON-based clients. A developer has deployed a software package on multiple EC2 instances using IAM roles. Which two actions can be performed to verify that these roles have the necessary permissions to retrieve records from Amazon Kinesis streams? Correct answer, use the IAM policy simulator to validate the roles policy. And perform a get action using the dry run argument. Explanation, the IAM policy simulator allows you to test if a policy permits specific actions without actually running them. Similarly, the dry run flag in the CLI verifies if you have the required permissions for a command without executing the request. Why others are incorrect, requesting a token and describing it does not directly validate if the specific Kinesis permissions are active or correctly configured. EC2 metadata provides information about the attached role but does not validate or simulate the actual permissions logic. IAM roles are not members of IAM groups, groups are only for IAM users, making this check irrelevant. A developer is preparing to deploy a Docker-based application that accesses Amazon DynamoDB by using the AWS SDK. While IAM access keys were used during local development, the application must authenticate securely when running in an Amazon ECS cluster. Which authentication method should be used in production? Correct answer: set up an ECS task IAM role for the application to utilize. Explanation: assigning an IAM role to the ECS task is the most secure and recommended method for production. It provides the container with temporary, scoped credentials automatically, eliminating the need to manage static secrets. Why others are incorrect: managing credentials files in a production container environment is operationally difficult and poses a security risk if the image is compromised. Storing static access keys in environment variables is a major security vulnerability and violates AWS best practices. While instance roles work, task-level roles are preferred because they provide granular security isolation for each specific application. An e-commerce startup is preparing for an annual sales event. As application traffic increases, the team needs to receive notifications when the CPU utilization of an Amazon EC2 instance exceeds 80%. Which solution meets this requirement? Correct answer: set up a CloudWatch alarm that sends a notification to an Amazon SNS topic when the threshold is met. Explanation: Amazon CloudWatch is the primary service for monitoring performance metrics like CPU utilization. Creating a CloudWatch alarm allows you to trigger automated actions, such as notifying an SNS topic, the moment a threshold is crossed. Why others are incorrect: the describe instance information command does not provide real-time CPU utilization metrics. CloudTrail tracks API calls and account activity, not granular performance metrics like CPU usage. CloudTrail does not log performance metrics, querying it for CPU utilization would yield no relevant data. An IAM role attached to an Amazon EC2 instance explicitly denies all Amazon S3 API actions. However, the instance's credentials file contains an access key and secret key that grant full administrative access. Considering the presence of multiple IAM credential sources, which statement correctly describes the resulting access behavior? Correct answer: the instance will not be able to perform any action on any S3 bucket. Explanation: in AWS IAM, an explicit deny always takes precedence over any allow permission. Even if the instance has administrative keys, the explicit deny policy attached to the role will block all S3 requests. Why others are incorrect: all other options are incorrect because an explicit deny is final. No other policy or credential source can override a deny statement. A developer is using Amazon Cognito user pools for a web application and needs to integrate Amazon DynamoDB. How can the developer securely call the DynamoDB API from the front end without exposing secret keys? Correct answer: exchange the Cognito JWT for temporary credentials via Amazon Cognito identity pools. Explanation: Cognito identity pools are designed to provide temporary AWS credentials to unauthenticated or authenticated users. By exchanging a JWT from the user pool for these credentials, the app can securely sign requests to DynamoDB. Why others are incorrect: hard-coding keys makes them visible to anyone who views the website's source code, regardless of the hosting or encryption used. User pool JWTs are for identity verification and cannot be used to authorize direct AWS Service API requests on their own. A front-end web application runs in the user's browser, not on the EC2 instance itself, so an instance profile cannot provide it with credentials. A developer is troubleshooting performance issues in an application composed of hundreds of microservices, where a single API request can traverse a deep call chain. The developer needs to identify the component responsible for the issue. Which AWS service or feature should be used to collect diagnostic data and isolate the fault? Correct answer: AWS X-Ray. Explanation: AWS X-Ray is specifically built to trace requests as they travel through various microservices. It provides a visual map of the call stack, making it easy to identify which component is experiencing latency or errors. Why others are incorrect: DVA-C is a data security service used to discover and protect sensitive data in S3. VPC flow logs capture network traffic data but do not provide insight into application-level performance or service call stacks. GuardDuty is a threat detection service that monitors for malicious activity, not a performance profiling tool. A company is building a REST API using Amazon API Gateway integrated with AWS Lambda. The API must support running multiple versions simultaneously for testing. What is the best way to achieve this? Correct answer: create an API Gateway resource policy to isolate different versions. Explanation: according to the source, the best way to accomplish version isolation for testing purposes is to utilize an API Gateway resource policy. This allows for the necessary context and isolation required for the Lambda functions. Why others are incorrect: authorizers are intended for authentication and access control, not for managing API versioning or deployment environments. While stages and stage variables are a common standard, the source specifically identifies the resource policy as the best answer for this instance. Relying on headers requires manual routing logic within your code, which is less efficient than using built-in API Gateway features.